To protect her brother from ruin, she weds a millionaire, but on their wedding night. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain poured down over the city, the streetlights glowing like blurred halos in the storm. Inside a small corner cafe, Emily sat clutching her brother's medical bills in trembling hands. The paper was damp, smudged by her tears, but the numbers burned into her mind. More than $20,000 owed to ruthless lenders. Her brother had been reckless, desperate, and now the weight of his debt threatened to crush them both. The door opened, and with it came a gust of cold air and the sound of heavy footsteps. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit entered, his presence cutting through the room like a blade. His name was Alexander Stone. To the public, he was a millionaire real estate tycoon known for his sharp mind and ruthless negotiations. To Emily, at this very moment, he was the only chance her brother had to survive. Alexander set down a leather folder on the table between them. Without small talk, without even a greeting, he opened it and revealed a contract, crisp and deliberate. His dark eyes never wavered from hers. "Your brother's debts can disappear tonight," he said, his voice low and precise. "But only if you agree to marry me." Emily's breath caught in her chest. She stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Marry you? I do not even know you." Alexander leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening with calm authority. "You do not need to know me. This is not about love, Miss Hayes. This is business. You will be my wife on paper, a partner in appearances. Nothing more. In exchange, I will pay your brother's debts and ensure no collector ever comes near him again." Her fingers gripped the edge of the bill so tightly that the paper nearly tore. The cafe around them faded. All she could hear was the steady beat of her own heart and his unyielding voice. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Alexander slid the folder closer. "A signature, a vow before the law, 5 public appearances as my wife, and absolute discretion. You will not ask questions about my business, and I will not interfere with your life beyond what is necessary. In return, your brother walks free." Emily's throat tightened. The choice was impossible, yet also cruelly clear. She thought of her brother lying in bed, pale from sleepless nights, the threats written on his door, the danger closing in. She thought of her mother's voice reminding her, "Family comes first, Emily. Always." Rain hammered against the glass. Alexander's gaze held her fast, unyielding, like the storm itself. Slowly, with shaking hands, she reached for the pen he had placed beside the contract. As the ink touched the page, Emily Hayes sealed not only her brother's fate, but her own. And with that single stroke, her life became bound to a man who promised nothing but cold protection and a wedding night that would change everything. Emily left the cafe with the contract pressed against her chest, as if the paper itself could shield her from the storm. The rain drenched her coat and plastered her hair to her face, but she barely noticed. Each step echoed with the knowledge that she had just sealed her own fate. She had agreed to marry a man she did not love, a man she had only just met, and she had done it for one reason, only her brother. When she returned to their small apartment, the contrast was staggering. The leaking ceiling dripped into a bucket on the floor. The wallpaper was faded and curling at the edges, and the smell of dampness lingered. Her brother Michael sat hunched on the couch, his thin frame swallowed by an oversized hoodie. He looked up, worry etched into his face. "Emily, where were you? Did the collectors come again? Did they threaten you?" She forced a smile, though her heart twisted with guilt. "It is handled. You do not need to worry anymore." His brow furrowed. "Handled? What do you mean? Emily, they will not just walk away. What did you do?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, to admit that she had signed her life away to a ruthless millionaire. But if Michael knew the price she had paid, it would crush him. He was already drowning in shame for the debt he had caused. She could not add to his burden. "Trust me," she whispered. "It is taken care of." That night, long after Michael had fallen asleep, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table. The contract lay before her, her signature glaring back like an accusation. She traced the ink with her fingertip and whispered into the silence. "What have I done?" Across town, Alexander Stone stood in his glass-walled penthouse, gazing out at the glittering skyline. The city below pulsed with life, but his expression was cold, unreadable. On the surface, the marriage contract was just another deal, a move to satisfy the board of directors and silence rumors about his private life. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face, her trembling hands, her voice heavy with desperation. She had signed the paper for family, not for wealth. That truth lingered in his mind longer than he cared to admit. The following morning, Emily's alarm buzzed at dawn. Life did not pause for impossible choices. She pulled on her worn shoes and tied her apron before heading to her shift at the diner. She greeted customers with a smile, but inside she felt hollow, every gesture mechanical. On her short break, she pulled out her sketchbook, the one piece of herself she refused to let go. Its pages were filled with drawings of city streets, faces, and dreamscapes of a gallery she might one day own. She sketched quickly, her pencil scratching against the paper, trying to draw away the fear building in her chest. For a moment, she imagined a different life, one where she was not bound to a man like Alexander Stone. But when she looked down at her sketch, all she saw was the cage of her reality. When her shift ended, a sleek black car was parked outside the diner. A driver in a dark suit stepped out, holding an umbrella. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Stone requests your presence." Emily froze. Her heart pounded in her ears. There was no going back. She clutched her sketchbook against her chest, as if the worn pages could anchor her to herself, and slid into the leather seat of the car. As the city blurred past the window, she saw her own reflection, pale, uncertain, but determined. She whispered to herself, "You can do this. You have to do this." At that very moment, Alexander sat in his office, reviewing contracts. The intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice came through. "Sir, she is on her way." He closed the file and adjusted his tie. He told himself this was business, nothing more. She was just a name on paper, a face to present to the world. And yet, somewhere deep within, Alexander felt an unfamiliar anticipation rising as he prepared to meet his new bride. For Emily, this was the price of love for her brother. For Alexander, this was supposed to be strategy. But neither of them could see how quickly the boundaries of their contract would begin to blur. The black car glided through the city until it stopped in front of a towering building of glass and steel. Emily stepped out, clutching her sketchbook, and craned her neck to take in the dizzying height of the structure. The doorman bowed slightly as the driver led her inside, past marble floors and golden elevators that hummed quietly as they carried her toward the top. Her pulse quickened with every passing floor. She was about to face Alexander Stone not as a stranger across a cafe table, but as the man who now owned a part of her future. The elevator doors opened, revealing a spacious office filled with sharp lines, leather chairs, and windows that looked out over the endless skyline. Alexander stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. When he turned, his gaze was as steady as ever. "Miss Hayes," he said. "Sit." Emily lowered herself into the chair opposite his desk. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sketchbook as he opened a folder. The air between them felt colder than the rain outside. "You should understand the terms of our agreement," Alexander began. His voice was precise, each word weighted with finality. "There will be no illusions between us. This is not about love, or family, or sentiment. This is about necessity." He slid a sheet of paper across the desk. Written in crisp black ink were the clauses of the contract she had already signed. Still, hearing them aloud made her chest tighten. "First," Alexander said, "you will accompany me to no fewer than 5 public events. Galas, board meetings, charity dinners. You will appear at my side, and you will act as my wife." Emily swallowed hard. She had never set foot in such places. Her life had been diners, sketchbooks, and bills. Now she would be thrust into glittering rooms, filled with the wealthy and powerful. "Second," he continued, "you will maintain discretion. No discussions with friends, no confessions to your brother. What happens between us remains between us." Her heart ached at the thought of lying to Michael, but she nodded. "Third," Alexander said, his gaze sharp, There will be no interference in my business. You will not ask questions. You will not pry into matters that do not concern you. Emily pressed her lips together. She wanted to protest, to remind him that marriage was supposed to mean partnership. But this was not marriage in the traditional sense. This was a bargain. And finally, Alexander said, his voice softening for the briefest moment, there will be boundaries. We will not confuse this arrangement with emotion. You are here because of necessity, nothing more. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her sketchbook on her lap. She forced herself to ask, why me? You could have chosen anyone. Why pick someone like me? Alexander leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his eyes locked onto hers, unflinching. Because you are desperate enough to say yes. And because you are honest enough not to pretend otherwise. The bluntness of his words cut her. But somewhere beneath the cold delivery, she sensed something else, a flicker of recognition, as if he knew too well what desperation felt like. Emily stood when he dismissed her. The driver was waiting to escort her to the car, but her mind was still tangled in the weight of his rules. Each clause felt like a chain tightening around her, and yet, as the city lights flickered against the window of the car, she whispered to herself, you can survive this. You have to. Back in his office, Alexander closed the folder and poured himself a glass of water. His reflection in the window stared back, sharp and composed. The contract had given him what he needed: stability, order, the appearance of control. Yet deep down, he knew the woman who had just walked out of his office was not like anyone else he had ever dealt with. Emily Hayes was fragile and strong, all at once, unwilling yet determined. And for reasons he could not explain, that unsettled him more than any boardroom battle ever had. The next morning, a knock at the door of Emily's apartment startled her. When she opened it, a poised woman in her 40s stood with a clipboard in hand. Behind her were two assistants carrying garment bags and boxes. Miss Hayes? The woman asked with a polite smile. My name is Claudia. Mr. Stone has instructed me to prepare you for your upcoming appearances. Emily's heart skipped. She stepped aside, allowing them into the cramped living room. The sight of silk gowns, tailored suits, and sleek shoes looked absurd against the peeling wallpaper and sagging furniture. Claudia moved with precision. You will need to be fitted for at least 3 gowns, 1 cocktail dress, and several pairs of shoes. We will also discuss etiquette, posture, and public speaking. By the time of your first event, no one will doubt you belong at Mr. Stone's side. Emily forced a nod, though her stomach twisted. Belong? She had never belonged in such a world. Yet as Claudia led her through fabric swatches and jewelry cases, Emily felt herself being transformed, piece by piece. Hours later, she stood before a mirror in a navy gown that hugged her frame. Her reflection was almost unrecognizable. The waitress who lived paycheck to paycheck was gone, replaced by a woman who looked every inch the wife of a millionaire. But when she reached up to touch the neckline, her fingers trembled. The dress fit her body, but not her heart. Claudia caught her hesitation. Confidence is an accessory, Miss Hayes. Wear it, even if you do not feel it. Oh. The following days were a blur of lessons. Emily practiced balancing a champagne flute without spilling, learned how to glide across a ballroom floor without tripping, and memorized polite responses to invasive questions. Each evening she returned home exhausted, clutching her sketchbook for comfort. She would draw herself as she once was, hair tied back, apron on, a smile that was real, not rehearsed. When the first public event arrived, Alexander arrived at her door in a black tuxedo. He looked as immovable as ever, yet his eyes flickered when he saw her step out in an emerald gown. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. You clean up well, he said finally, his tone even but not unkind. Emily managed a thin smile. Thank you. I will try not to embarrass you. His gaze sharpened. This is not about embarrassment. Remember what we agreed. 5 events, nothing more. You are here to stand at my side, not to lose yourself. The words stung, but she nodded. Together they entered the gala, the flash of cameras blinding, the hum of voices rising like a tide. Emily's pulse raced. She clung to Alexander's arm, feeling the weight of every glance, every whispered speculation. Who is she? Someone murmured. New wife? Out of nowhere, another voice hissed. Emily forced her chin up, remembering Claudia's lessons. She smiled, answered questions politely, and laughed when required. The polished mask held, though inside she felt fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter the illusion. At one point, a journalist pushed forward, microphone raised. "Mrs. Stone, some say this marriage was sudden. Do you love your husband, or is this about money?" Emily froze, her heart hammering. The ballroom seemed to tilt. But then she remembered her brother's face, pale with worry, and her mother's voice telling her family came first. She straightened and answered calmly, "Love is proven through actions, not words. My husband has stood by me, and I will stand by him." A ripple moved through the crowd. Alexander glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but for the first time, there was something softer in his eyes. Later that night, when the gala ended and the city lights reflected off the limousine windows, Emily exhaled for the first time in hours. She had survived. She had played her part. Yet deep down, she wondered if she had done more than survive, if perhaps she had begun to leave an impression on the man who claimed he felt nothing. Alexander sat beside her in silence, his hands folded neatly, his gaze fixed on the passing skyline. He said nothing, but when their reflections crossed in the glass, his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. Emily turned her head away, clutching her sketchbook in her lap. The contract had rules, boundaries, no emotions. But the line between performance and reality was already beginning to blur. The limousine rolled to a stop in front of the next event only a week later. It was not just another gala, but the annual Stone Foundation Charity Ball, one of the most talked-about evenings in the city. Dozens of cameras lined the red carpet, flashing endlessly as the wealthy and powerful stepped out of their cars. Emily's palms were damp despite the silk gloves she wore. She leaned slightly toward Alexander as the driver opened the door. "I do not know if I can do this," she whispered. Alexander offered his hand, his expression calm, almost detached. "Yes, you can. Just remember, this is performance. Smile. Answer only what you are asked. And do not let them see fear." She took his hand and stepped out. The lights burst around them, the sound of shutters clicking, filling her ears like thunder. Questions flew at them about business, about marriage, about her identity. Emily kept her chin up, repeating Claudia's instructions silently in her head. Shoulders back, steady breath, polite smile. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered above polished marble floors. Waiters moved like clockwork, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Every eye turned toward Emily as she entered with Alexander. The whispers followed her, but she forced herself to keep walking. It was only a matter of minutes before the first real challenge arrived. A reporter, emboldened by the crowd, stepped forward with a microphone. His tone was sharp, mocking. "Mrs. Stone, many are saying your marriage to Mr. Stone was nothing but a business transaction. Do you care to comment? Is this love, or is it money?" Emily froze. The words cut deeper than she expected. The ballroom seemed to tilt under the weight of so many eyes. She felt the old shame rising, the waitress with nothing, the girl drowning in debt. But then she thought of Michael, her brother safe at home because of this choice. She thought of her mother's voice, whispering that family was worth sacrifice. Emily drew in a steady breath. Her voice came clear and calm. "Love is not about how fast a story begins. It is about how two people stand by each other when the world questions them. My husband has stood by me, and I will stand by him." For a moment, the ballroom went quiet. The reporter lowered his microphone, caught off guard by her composure. Then, a ripple of applause spread through the crowd. Soft at first, then stronger. Alexander's gaze flickered to her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes lingered longer than usual. He gave the slightest nod, acknowledging not only her words, but her strength. The evening continued with speeches and dancing. Emily moved through the crowd with practiced grace, answering questions, smiling when needed, even laughing once or twice. But beneath the polished mask, her heart raced with the knowledge that she had just passed her first public test. She had stood in front of the city's elite and not crumbled. Later, as the night drew to a close, Emily found herself on the balcony overlooking the glowing skyline. The cool night air brushed her face, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself a real smile. "You handled yourself well tonight." Alexander's voice came from behind her. He stepped onto the balcony, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his posture relaxed in a way she had not seen before. "Thank you," Emily replied softly. "I thought I would fall apart." "You did not," he said, his gaze steady on her. "You held your ground. Many would not." Ugh. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city below. Emily turned to face him, the distance between them smaller than it had ever been. "I just did what I had to," she whispered. "For my brother, for my family." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes then, something that broke through the armor he wore so carefully. He did not speak of it, but Emily saw it the faintest trace of respect, maybe even admiration. The moment passed quickly. Alexander straightened, his expression settling back into cool composure. "Get some rest. There will be more nights like this." As he walked back inside, Emily touched the railing and looked out over the lights. For the first time, she felt a sliver of strength rising in her chest. She was not just surviving this contract. She was proving herself, step by step, in a world that wanted her to fail. And somewhere deep within, she wondered if Alexander Stone, the man who insisted on rules and boundaries, was beginning to see her as more than just a name on a contract. The days after the charity ball moved quickly, filled with more lessons, fittings, and preparations. Yet despite the pace, something in Emily had shifted. She had faced the scrutiny of reporters, the judgment of strangers, and she had survived. For the first time since signing the contract, she felt she might actually be able to carry the weight of this bargain. But Alexander Stone remained a mystery. He was polished and precise in public, a fortress of control. At dinners and meetings, he spoke with power, his words sharp and deliberate. Yet in private moments, when the crowds faded away, there were cracks in the armor, tiny glimpses of the man beneath the mask. It was late one evening when Emily found herself wandering the quiet halls of his penthouse. The charity ball had drained her, and sleep would not come. She carried her sketchbook in her arms, searching for a quiet corner to draw. Her footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors, until she noticed a light spilling from a half-open door. Curiosity tugged at her. She pushed the door gently and found Alexander seated on a leather chair in what looked like a library. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and a fire burned low in the hearth. Alexander was not in his usual suit, but a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He held a glass in one hand, staring at the flames as if searching for answers in the flicker of light. Emily hesitated. She should have left, but something about the stillness of the moment kept her rooted. "You should be asleep," Alexander said without turning his head. His voice was low, softer than she had ever heard it. "I could not sleep," she admitted, stepping inside. "I did not mean to intrude." He gestured toward a chair across from him. "If you are awake, you may as well sit." She lowered herself into the chair, clutching her sketchbook. The silence stretched before she finally asked, "Do you always sit here at night?" Alexander's eyes flicked to hers, then back to the fire. "Sometimes. The city never stops moving. It helps to sit somewhere quiet." Emily studied him, the man everyone else saw as ruthless and untouchable. Yet here he was, sitting alone in a room filled with books, shadows etched across his face. For the first time, he seemed less like a tycoon and more like a man. "You do not strike me as someone who likes quiet," she said softly. A faint smile touched his lips, though it vanished quickly. "Appearances can deceive, Mrs. Stone." Her fingers tightened around her sketchbook. "Why did you really do this? Not the contract, not the business reason. The truth." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. For a moment, she thought he would dismiss her question, but instead he said, "Because I am tired of being alone." The honesty of the words startled her. Alexander Stone, the man who commanded boardrooms and ruled skylines, admitting to loneliness. He continued, his voice steady but distant. "People see me as power, money, reputation. They see what I can give them, never who I am. A contract marriage was easier than risking something real." Emily's chest tightened. She had expected cold calculation, but not this. Not the raw truth of a man who feared emptiness more than scandal. She opened her sketchbook and turned it toward him. "Then maybe you need to remember you are still human." On the page was a rough sketch she had drawn earlier, a city skyline with one light glowing in a single window. He studied it for a long moment, his jaw tense, but his eyes softened in a way she had never seen before. "You are different," he said quietly. "Different from the people who orbit my world." Emily swallowed, unsure what to say. The air between them had changed, grown heavier, closer. She could feel the boundary of the contract pressing in, warning her to stay distant. Yet in that moment, as the firelight flickered, she saw Alexander not as a millionaire bound by rules, but as a man who carried his own scars. The silence lingered until he finally stood, straightening his shirt. "It is late. You should rest. There is another event tomorrow." Emily nodded, rising slowly. But as she left the library, her heart pounded with a truth she could no longer ignore. The contract had boundaries. No love, no emotion, no confusion. But something had shifted between them tonight. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew the walls of the agreement were beginning to crack. The following week unfolded with a deceptive calm. Emily attended another charity luncheon, another board dinner, another evening where she stood beside Alexander like a carefully chosen ornament. She smiled, she spoke when required, and each night she returned to her room carrying the exhaustion of performance. Yet the memory of their late-night conversation in the library lingered. She had seen something fragile in Alexander, something that refused to leave her thoughts. But calm never lasted long in his world. It began with a headline. The morning papers screamed in bold letters. "Stone's sudden marriage raises questions. Is it all for show?" Inside were photographs of Emily on Alexander's arm, her background dissected, her past employment at the diner highlighted with cruel emphasis. Words like gold digger and transactional cut across the page. Emily stared at the article at the kitchen counter, her hands trembling. "They know everything," she whispered. Alexander entered the room moments later, already dressed in a tailored suit. He scanned the paper without flinching, though his jaw tightened. It was bound to happen. Someone has been feeding them information. Who would do that? She asked, though fear already tightened in her chest. He looked up, his gaze cold. Someone who wants this arrangement to fail. By afternoon, the answer revealed itself. At a meeting inside the Stone Enterprises boardroom, whispers filled the air as Alexander led Emily to a seat beside him. Among the crowd sat Victoria Langford, Alexander's former fiancée, a socialite with influence and bitterness sharpened into a weapon. She stood with a smirk, as if the stage belonged to her. "Alexander," she said sweetly, her voice dripping venom. "Such a surprise to see you married so suddenly, and to someone so unexpected." Her eyes swept over Emily like a blade. "The papers say she was a waitress. Is that true? How very unconventional of you." Emily's cheeks burned, but Alexander spoke before she could respond. "My wife's past is no one's concern but mine." The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispers spreading. Victoria's smile widened. "Oh, but it is the concern of investors who depend on your image. A hasty marriage to a stranger? Rumors of a contract? Tell me, Alexander, how long until this house of cards collapses?" Emily's breath caught. Contract. The word rang like a siren in her ears. If the board believed the marriage was staged, everything could unravel Michael's safety, her place in this fragile arrangement, all of it. Alexander stood slowly, his height and presence silencing the room. "Enough. This meeting is about business, not gossip." His voice cut through the air, firm and final, but Emily could still feel the eyes on her, the doubt, the judgment. She lowered her gaze to the polished table, fighting the sting of tears. That night, back at the penthouse, she faced Alexander in the dim light of the living room. She knows it is not real. What if she exposes us? Alexander's eyes darkened, a storm behind them. "Then we hold the line. Let them speculate. Let them whisper. No one can prove anything unless we falter." "So we will not falter." His words were steady, but Emily could hear the edge of something else. Anger, yes, but also fear. For the first time, she realized the stakes were not hers alone. If this marriage collapsed, Alexander had as much to lose as she did. And now, with enemies circling and the truth threatening to surface, the contract they had built was no longer just a bargain. It was a battle. The storm of rumors did not fade. Each day, new headlines questioned their marriage. Each night, Emily felt the walls close in tighter. Even within Alexander's penthouse, whispers reached them, carried on the phones of staff, in the eyes of strangers who looked too long. The breaking point came during the annual Stone Enterprises shareholder gala. The ballroom was filled with more than chandeliers and champagne. It was filled with suspicion. Every investor, every journalist, every rival seemed eager to see cracks in Alexander Stone's perfect empire. Emily stood beside him, her emerald gown shimmering under the lights, but inside she was shaking. Victoria Langford was there, of course, gliding through the crowd like a predator. She approached with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said loudly, her voice carrying across the hall, "we must toast to Alexander's sudden marriage, or shall we call it what it is? A contract, not a union. Tell us, Alexander, is this woman truly your wife, or just a hired player in your empire's charade?" The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The word hung in the air like poison contract. All eyes turned to Alexander. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. He could deny, he could deflect, he could protect his empire with silence. But then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. From it, he withdrew not the contract, but the very pen Emily had used that rainy night in the cafe. He held it high enough for all to see. "You want truth?" he said, his voice carrying with authority. "The truth is that this pen signed an agreement, yes. An agreement that bound me to the woman beside me. And in binding me, it revealed something I did not expect." He turned to Emily. His eyes, usually so guarded, softened in a way that startled her. It revealed love, not forged, not faked, real, and tonight I will prove it. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. Emily's heart pounded. She whispered, "Alexander, what are you doing?" But he did not answer. Instead, he took the microphone from the band's singer and faced the crowd. "I am Alexander Stone. I do not bow to rumors, and I do not need to hide behind contracts. Tonight, I declare not business, but truth." Then, before the entire room, he dropped the pen onto the floor. The sharp click echoed like a gunshot. "This contract is over. This woman is my wife, not because of obligation, but because she is the only person who has ever stood by me with honesty and courage." Gasps rippled through the room. Some applauded, others whispered, but none could deny the magnitude of the gesture. Alexander turned back to Emily. From his pocket, he pulled out a velvet box. He opened it, revealing not a symbol of transaction, but a ring, glittering with sincerity. "Emily Hayes, I choose you, not for appearances, not for convenience. I choose you because I love you." Emily's vision blurred with tears. For a moment, the crowd, the cameras, the whispers, all of it vanished. There was only Alexander, the man who had begun as a contract, and now stood before her, offering something real. Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. "Then I choose you too." The ballroom erupted in applause, and for the first time, Emily felt the chains of the contract shatter. What remained was not obligation, but love. Public, undeniable, and true. The sound of applause filled the ballroom, echoing off the high ceilings like a thunderous wave. Cameras flashed, investors stood, and even the doubters could not deny the power of what they had just witnessed. Alexander Stone, the ruthless millionaire known for contracts and control, had torn down the walls he once hid behind. And Emily Hayes, the woman once mocked as a gold digger, now stood proudly at his side, her hand in his, her tears shimmering in the light. From that night forward, the whispers lost their strength. The media could print their headlines, rivals could spread their rumors, but the world had seen something undeniable, a man choosing love in front of the very empire he had built. The shareholders, once skeptical, found themselves applauding not just Alexander's courage but also the stability his declaration created. His empire did not collapse. It grew stronger. Weeks later, Emily walked into the small apartment she once called home. The ceiling still leaked. The wallpaper still peeled. But tonight, it was quiet. Her brother Michael sat at the table, healthier than she had seen him in months, a relieved smile on his face. The collectors were gone, the threats had vanished. His debts were cleared, not through fear, but through the sacrifice she had made. "Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you saved me. You gave up everything for me. I do not know how to repay you." She hugged him tightly, tears filling her eyes. You do not have to repay me. Just live better, live free. That is all I need." Later that evening, Alexander arrived. He did not come as the millionaire tycoon towering above the city, but as a man carrying takeout bags of Michael's favorite food, and a quiet smile that Emily had grown to recognize as rare but genuine. They ate together at the worn table, laughter filling the cracks in the old apartment. For the first time, Emily felt the sharp line between her world and his begin to fade. Months passed, and the city whispered less about scandal and more about the transformation of Alexander Stone. Under his leadership, Stone Enterprises launched a new charitable initiative, inspired by Emily herself, focused on helping families drowning in debt. Her sketches of food trucks and mobile kitchens became the foundation for a project that touched countless lives. What began as a contract to protect her brother had grown into a partnership that lifted entire communities. On their first anniversary, Alexander led Emily back to the cafe where everything had begun. The rain tapped softly against the windows, a mirror of the stormy night when he had first laid the contract before her. But tonight, there was no folder, no pen, no transaction. Instead, Alexander placed a simple frame on the table. Inside was the original contract. Its ink faded, but still visible. Across the signature line, he had written in bold letters, "Null and void." "This," he said, his voice steady but warm, "was the start of us. But this," he reached into his pocket and revealed a second ring, delicate and shimmering, "is the truth of us. No contracts, no conditions, only love." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing not a bargain but a promise. The storm outside eased, and the city lights glowed brighter. Together, they stepped out of the cafe, not as strangers bound by desperation, but as husband and wife bound by choice, by courage, and by love that had proven itself stronger than status, stronger than doubt, stronger than any contract could ever be.